Let's start off with 10 things we learned in our last video about ANZAC Day. 1. Every country like New Zealand, Australia, Britain, the United States all have an army. An army is made up of soldiers, and the job of a soldier is to protect and serve their country. In New Zealand, we have what we call the New Zealand Defence Force. In New Zealand, we have 3 forces who defend and serve New Zealanders. Our army protects our land and the New Zealand people, the Navy protects our sea, and the Air Force protects our airspace. 2. New Zealand is part of a special group of countries which honour the King of England as their sovereign. We call this the Commonwealth. In April 1915, Britain needed help in the war, so they called all the countries in the Commonwealth, like Australia and New Zealand, for help. 3. In New Zealand, a law passed which meant that all healthy men aged between 20 to 45 had to go to war. There was a special word for this. It was called conscription. 4. Women were also part of the war. Not in the battle, of course, but they had a job in the war too. During the war, women were working on the hospital ships as nurses, and over 75% of the engineers were women. 5. In 1915, Australia and New Zealand went to war with Britain, and they formed the ANZACs, the Australian New Zealand Army Corps. 6. Britain's goal was to capture a place called Gallipoli. 7. We celebrate ANZAC on April 25th because this was the day the ANZACs landed on Gallipoli. 8. On April 25th, all around the world, we honour the ANZACs at dawn services because the ANZACs landed on Gallipoli at dawn. 9. Poppies also help us to remember the ANZACs because during the war, the fields were blossoming with poppies. 10. After the war ended, over 58,000 men lost their lives fighting in the war. 29,000 from Britain and 12,000 from Australia and New Zealand. ANZAC is a special part of our New Zealand history, and we have monuments and memorials all over the country to help us remember our ANZAC history. So many New Zealanders and Australians lost their lives fighting in the war, but being a soldier, fighting in the front was not the only job you could have. Here are some of the jobs you could have as a soldier. You could be a hot air balloonist. In the war, they used hot air balloons to get up very high and spy on the enemy. You could be a bath attendant, someone who made sure that the soldiers had everything they needed to take a bath at the end of the day. You could be a stretch bearer, someone who carried injured soldiers on stretchers to get medical help. You could be a caterer, cook, or a chef, making sure soldiers had something to eat. You could have been a chaplain, someone who prayed and supported the soldiers and led funerals for soldiers who died in war. You could have been a diver, a dentist, or an animal handler, in the way they used all kinds of animals like dogs, camels, and horses. You could have been a vet, people who could look after sick animals during war. You could be a driver. In the war, they used all kinds of vehicles like army tanks. You could be an engineer, fixing and building transport vehicles. Intelligence officer planning the strategy for war. You could even be a meteorologist, someone who checks the weather. Or signalers, people who make sure all the messages get sent to everyone out in the war. You also could have been a navigator, giving soldiers directions of where to go. Or a postal person, collecting and delivering all the mail for the soldiers. They even had musicians. Music, especially brass bands, were a very important part of the armies. A special brass instrument called the bugle were used to communicate orders. A bugle is what they used to play the very important song, The Last Post, at the dawn services. To run a successful army, you need so many soldiers to do so many different jobs. Have you ever seen a soldier wear medals like these and wondered what they mean or how you can earn a medal like this? Sometimes soldiers in the war were awarded special medals by the King or Queen of England for their bravery, service, or any special achievements they made during the war. There were many ANZAC heroes who were awarded medals. For example, this is the Victoria Cross. The Victoria Cross is the highest military decoration awarded for valour in the face of the enemy to members of the armed forces or Commonwealth countries. Valour means great bravery, especially in battle. Charles Upham was a New Zealand soldier from Christchurch who was also captain in the army. Charles Upham was awarded the Victoria Cross twice during the Second World War, for gallantry in Crete in May 1941 and in Egypt in July 1942. He was the only soldier to receive this award twice. Gallantry means to show bravery in battle. John Simpson was a stretcher bearer with the 3rd Australian Field Ambulance during the Gallipoli campaign. During the war, Simpson used donkeys to provide first aid and carry wounded soldiers to the beach so that they could get help. Simpson and his donkey Duffy have become part of the ANZAC legends for their bravery and courage during the war. During the war, so many brave and courageous New Zealanders risked their lives for our freedom, and today we remember these soldiers. These soldiers were very brave and courageous, and they remind us that we can also be brave and courageous. We don't need to go to war to show bravery and courage. Every day we can find small ways to practice being brave and courageous. So let us honour and always remember the 59,000 brave Australian and New Zealand soldiers who fought for our freedom, lest we forget.